The cameras had barely started rolling when Prince Harry's voice cracked. No one expected tears. No one expected confession. But that night, live on international television, a prince looked straight into the lens and shattered the illusion the world had been clinging to. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What he said next, it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't royal. It was raw, trembling, and heartbreakingly human. "I can't keep pretending anymore," he whispered. And that was it. The moment a century of royal control slipped through trembling fingers. You could hear the collective gasp of millions watching. The studio audience froze, as if time itself had paused. Meghan Markle, sitting backstage, stared at the monitor, her hand clutching her phone like a lifeline. Producers exchanged frantic glances. The host leaned forward, sensing something seismic was about to erupt. But before Harry could finish, before the truth could completely escape his lips, the camera cut away, just for a second. Long enough to leave the world with one haunting question. What did he mean? Was it about his marriage? His family? Or something far more unthinkable? Something involving Archie and Lilibet? That's where tonight's story begins. Because what unfolded in that studio wasn't a breakdown. It was a revelation years in the making. A revelation about love, deception, and identity. A revelation that may redefine what we think we know about royal blood. But let's rewind for a moment. How did we get here, to this televised moment of implosion? To understand Harry's breakdown, we need to go back to the beginning. To the quiet clues that were dismissed as tabloid fiction, the small inconsistencies the palace hoped no one would notice, and the emotional unraveling that's been playing out behind the smiling PR photos for years. When Harry met Meghan, it was supposed to be the fairy tale reborn. A prince, scarred by tragedy, finally finding his happily ever after. But somewhere between the fairy tale and the fallout, between the wedding bells and the whispered rumors, something darker began to form. Have you ever noticed how Meghan's pregnancies were surrounded by mystery? The missing hospital entries, the constantly changing timelines, the tightly controlled photo ops? People said it was privacy. Others whispered it was secrecy. And then came those odd reports from inside the palace, that medical staff had been dismissed, that protocols were altered. Royal historians called it unprecedented. Harry called it necessary. But necessary for what? For protection? Or for concealment? The world didn't have answers then, but now, after that live TV moment, we might. Because what Harry revealed wasn't just emotion, it was guilt. Deep, suffocating guilt that had been eating him alive. Those tears weren't for the cameras. They were for something, or someone, he could no longer hide. Now, here's where the story twists. This wasn't some late-night talk show meltdown. This was a carefully arranged, primetime interview, one Meghan herself had reportedly approved. According to a studio insider, Meghan had even chosen Harry's wardrobe. She wanted it to project calm and confidence. She didn't expect vulnerability, and she definitely didn't expect confession. Minutes before airtime, Harry had been pacing. Crew members said he was muttering to himself, repeating, "It's time. It's time." His assistant tried to hand him water, but he waved it off. When the red light came on, the world saw a man barely holding himself together. He smiled. He tried. But you could tell something was breaking beneath that royal posture. The host began with soft questions. The Netflix projects, the children, California life. Harry answered mechanically, every word rehearsed. But then came the pivot. How are Archie and Lilibet doing? And that's when everything shifted. Harry's smile faltered. His eyes dropped. The silence stretched a little too long. The host, sensing the moment, pressed gently. "You seem emotional. Are you okay talking about them?" And Harry exhaled. Not the casual kind. The kind that sounds like release. Like surrender. What followed was silence. Long, aching silence. Until he said it. That now infamous line. "They're not mine." The audience gasped. The host blinked, unsure if he'd misheard. Meghan's name trended online before the segment even finished airing. But here's the twist. Producers claim Harry didn't stop there. In the uncut feed, before the commercial break, he allegedly continued, "They were borrowed." I didn't know at first, but I do now. Borrowed. That word sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, through Hollywood, through every living room glued to that broadcast. What could he possibly mean? Did he mean surrogacy? Was he referring to a secret arrangement? Or something darker? Something that crossed lines no one ever imagined a royal would? This wasn't the first time whispers surrounded Archie and Lilibet's births. Remember when hospital staff in London mysteriously refused to comment? Or when Meghan's baby bump seemed to shift between appearances, sometimes flat, sometimes full, sometimes vanishing entirely in certain camera angles. For years, anyone who questioned it was labeled cruel or crazy. But tonight, after Harry's emotional implosion, even the skeptics were listening. Because this wasn't a tabloid headline anymore. This was a confession from the one man who should have been most certain. The children's own father. Now, think about the timing. This happened just days after new reports surfaced about inconsistencies in Lillibet's California birth certificate. Journalists had discovered alterations, signatures that didn't match, and missing hospital staff records. The palace declined to comment. Meghan's team dismissed it as clerical error. But clerical errors don't make a prince cry on live TV. No, this was something deeper. This was the weight of years of deceit finally collapsing. Imagine the pressure, the royal name, the media expectations, the billion-dollar branding machine built on a modern royal family. If any of it were a lie, everything collapses. The fairy tale, the Netflix deals, the Archwell empire. And maybe that's what Harry realized too late. Maybe, after years of silence, he couldn't bear it anymore. The studio crew described his breakdown as unplanned, uncontainable, and chilling. Some said Meghan tried calling into the control room, demanding they cut the feed. But the director refused. "We're live," he said. "The world is watching." And the world was watching, in disbelief. When the segment ended, Harry reportedly ripped off his mic and whispered, "It's done." Done hiding? Done protecting? Or done being part of the illusion? No one knows. What we do know is that within hours, Buckingham Palace went into crisis mode. Phones rang through the night. Lawyers were mobilized. And somewhere in California, Meghan Markle was reportedly furious beyond words. But this isn't just about scandal. It's about something bigger. It's about truth. Because Harry's admission didn't come from nowhere. It was the explosion at the end of a long fuse. A fuse lit years ago inside the palace walls. A fuse tied to secret documents, hushed payments, and medical files that disappeared overnight. It's about how one of the world's most powerful families may have orchestrated one of the most elaborate cover-ups in modern royal history. And here's the haunting part. What if Harry was never supposed to find out? What if someone, maybe even Meghan, intended to keep him in the dark forever? That night on live TV wasn't just a breakdown. It was a rebellion. A prince defying not just his family, but the machinery of deception built around him. And as we dive deeper into this story, piece by piece, the web will start to reveal itself. The whispered arguments, the secret hospital visit, the hush money that changed hands, the missing DNA file, and the woman who claims to have seen it all. Each layer exposes something darker, something far more personal than politics or PR. Because at the heart of it all isn't just scandal, it's identity. Who are Archie and Lilibet? And what truth was Prince Harry so desperate to confess that he risked destroying his life on live television to say it? The answer, as unbelievable as it sounds, may involve a secret network spanning continents, money, and manipulation. And once you hear what insiders have revealed about the borrowed children theory, you'll never look at those family photos the same way again. But before we get to that, we have to go behind the cameras. Because moments before Harry's tearful confession, a single whisper in the studio corridor set everything in motion. A whisper that Meghan never wanted the world to hear. And it came from someone very close, someone who had been waiting years for this truth to surface. Because that's where the story truly begins, with a conversation no one was supposed to overhear. And when you hear what was said in that room, you'll understand why Harry finally broke. And why Meghan's empire may never recover from what happened next. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What really happened when the cameras kept rolling? Was it a setup, a moment of madness, or the most shocking confession in royal history? The world only saw 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds tore open decades of silence. Inside the studio, the lights were merciless. They painted Harry's face in stark contrast. Every tremor, every blink, every flash of guilt magnified for millions to see. The teleprompter still scrolled, But Harry wasn't reading anymore. His lips parted, and his breathing came in shallow bursts. The host froze mid-question. You could almost hear the hum of the studio lights, that sterile sound of electricity meeting tension. Meghan was backstage, pacing, whispering into her phone. A producer swore under his breath. And then, the words. They're not mine. No script. No rehearsal. Just raw confession. The host's eyes widened. For a moment, it looked like he thought Harry was joking, some dark attempt at humor gone wrong. But the tears weren't acting. The trembling hands weren't theater. The camera operator caught it, the faint shimmer at the edge of Harry's lashes. He blinked once, twice, and it fell, a single tear rolling down his cheek. Silence. Then murmurs from the audience. And then chaos. Backstage, Meghan hissed, "Cut the feed." But the director shook his head. They were live. Cutting would only make it worse. So the world watched. Harry leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He looked exhausted, like a man carrying something far heavier than royal secrets. The host, still trying to hold composure, asked softly, "What do you mean, Harry?" Harry's response was quiet, barely audible. "I didn't know at first. They told me it was for our safety." He stopped himself, as if realizing he'd gone too far. He wiped his face, straightened up, and forced a smile so hollow it made everyone in the room uneasy. But you can't unhear something like that. The audience, though told not to speak, gasped collectively. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The sound was caught faintly on the boom mic. And in that single instant, something shifted, not just in Harry, but in the air around him. It was as if the weight of every royal tradition, every palace secret, every PR-approved lie had landed on one man's shoulders and finally broke them. Do you think he planned it? Or do you think he just couldn't take it anymore? Because according to one insider sitting just off stage, Harry's entire demeanor changed seconds before the interview began. Up until that moment, he'd been calm, rehearsed, polite. Then, a crew member handed him a small, cream-colored envelope, unmarked. He opened it, glanced inside, and froze. Whatever he saw inside that envelope shattered the composure he'd been clinging to. We'll come back to that envelope later, but keep it in mind, because it's the key to everything. As the live broadcast continued, producers tried signaling Harry to stick to safe topics: charity work, climate issues, mental health, anything but family. But Harry's mind was somewhere else entirely. He stared past the cameras, lost in thought, eyes glassy. When the host tried steering him back, asking about fatherhood, Harry let out a strange laugh, half sad, half disbelieving. "Fatherhood," he echoed, then paused, his jaw tightening. "It's complicated." The host, sensing something monumental brewing, leaned closer. "Complicated how?" Harry exhaled through his nose, that sharp sound of someone trying not to explode. "When you raise children you didn't. When you're told to love them as your own, even when you know." He didn't finish. His voice cracked, and he pressed a hand to his face. "Harry," the host whispered, "are you saying?" "I'm saying," Harry cut in, his tone suddenly sharper. "Sometimes the truth comes too late." You could feel the chills sweep across the studio. What truth? Too late for what? Online, Twitter was already on fire. Viewers were clipping the moment, replaying it, lip-reading. Within minutes, "They're not mine" became the top trending phrase worldwide. But inside that studio, everything was falling apart. One crew member later described the scene. Meghan's voice through a headset, "End it now." A producer whispering, "We can't." And Harry, motionless, staring at the floor like he was watching his life dissolve in slow motion. When the commercial break finally hit, the director cut the feed, and chaos erupted. Meghan stormed out of the green room, fury etched across her face. She grabbed Harry's arm, trying to pull him away from the cameras, but he refused to move. His eyes were red, unfocused. "You weren't supposed to say that," she hissed. Harry didn't answer. He looked at her, then at the host, then at the crew, and quietly said, "I can't keep living a lie." A nearby mic caught it. It never made it to air, but several staff members later confirmed those exact words. "Do you hear that? That's not the voice of a rebel prince. That's the voice of a broken man." And yet, instead of sympathy, the machine kicked in. The PR spin, the damage control. By the next morning, palace sources claimed Harry was emotionally exhausted, misquoted, taken out of context. But those who were there knew better. They'd seen the unedited footage. And in that footage, never broadcast, Harry went further. He mentioned agreements, arrangements, and documents that weren't supposed to exist. He said he wasn't involved in the process. He repeated the word borrowed over and over. Borrowed. Every time he said it, he seemed to lose another piece of himself. Was he referring to surrogacy, adoption, or something stranger, something orchestrated by forces beyond even Meghan? Whatever it was, he believed it. And belief, in that moment, was enough to destroy everything. After the broadcast, Harry reportedly retreated to his car. Witnesses say he sat there for nearly 20 minutes, staring straight ahead. Then, he whispered to his driver, "It's out now. They can't stop it." Those words terrified everyone close to him, because they implied something more, something far beyond a slip of the tongue. The next day, the studio's security footage mysteriously vanished. Meghan's lawyers contacted the network, threatening lawsuits. The host went silent, canceling all interviews for a week. But not everyone stayed quiet. A junior producer, someone new, someone not yet conditioned by fear, leaked details of what happened backstage moments before the confession. And that's where things take an even darker turn. Because, according to this producer, Meghan had been on the phone with someone, frantically repeating one phrase: "He's going to ruin everything." Everything. What could everything possibly mean? A marriage? A brand? Or a deception big enough to shake the foundation of the royal narrative itself? That night, Harry returned home alone. He refused calls from Meghan's team. Insiders claim he unplugged every device, shut off his phone, and sat in silence for hours. Neighbors reported seeing lights flicker inside their Montecito mansion until after 3 a.m. One witness, a local security guard, claimed he heard shouting, then a door slam, then nothing. And in that nothing, the questions grew louder. Who sent that envelope? What did it contain? And why did Harry's entire world crumble seconds after reading it? Because here's the thing. A single sheet of paper can destroy an empire. And according to someone who later handled that very envelope, it contained a laboratory report, a DNA comparison. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it did. The results? We'll come back to that soon. But first, we have to rewind, just a few hours before the broadcast, when a quiet conversation in the hallway gave Harry the courage, or the terror, to tell the truth. It wasn't with Meghan. It wasn't with a royal aide. It was with someone he thought he'd never see again. Someone who whispered 6 words that triggered everything. They lied to you about them. Who said it? How did they know? That's where the real unraveling begins. Because the moment Harry heard those 6 words, he stopped being the prince who played along, and became the man willing to burn it all down. And when you learn who whispered them, you'll understand why Meghan's panic backstage wasn't about a marriage falling apart. It was about a secret years in the making finally catching up to them. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Who could have predicted that a few words whispered in a hallway would unravel the royal illusion? Who knew that one tiny spark could ignite a chain reaction that would leave the world gasping in disbelief? Moments before Prince Harry walked onto that stage, before the lights, the cameras, the millions of eyes worldwide, there was a whisper. Just 6 words. But in those 6 words lay the power to shatter decades of secrecy. They lied to you about them. Harry froze when he heard it. The words weren't loud, not exactly audible to anyone else. But in the quiet backstage corridor of the studio, they cut through the rehearsed calm like a knife. He turned sharply, eyes scanning for the source. A young producer, someone new to the system, stepped back, wide-eyed. No one else was around. Harry's pulse quickened. He didn't recognize the voice, yet something about it pierced him. It wasn't accusatory. It was simply the truth, delivered calmly, almost sadly. The timing was perfect. The envelope hadn't been handed to him yet. The stage lights were still off. And suddenly, the weight of everything, the marriage, the public scrutiny, the endless media narratives, pressed down on him. How could this be real? How could someone risk everything to say these words now? As he stood there, barely breathing, the whisperer added a sentence under their breath. "You need to know. Before it's too late." Too late. Harry's mind raced. Too late for what? Too late to protect who? He looked around. The studio seemed enormous, the empty space echoing the whisper. The scent of coffee and makeup hung in the air. His suit felt tighter, constricting, as though it was a physical reminder of all the roles he was forced to play: prince, husband, father, public figure. But this whisper didn't care about roles. It didn't care about appearances. It cut through every facade he had ever constructed. Harry took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. He wasn't supposed to think this way. This was supposed to be a simple interview, scripted, controlled. He was supposed to smile, nod, make small talk about the children, and leave before anyone could ask uncomfortable questions. But the whisper had changed everything. He replayed the words in his head over and over. They lied to you about them. Could it really be true? Could the children, Archie and Lilibet, really not be his? The thought was absurd, impossible. And yet, the whisperer's tone, the conviction behind the words, forced him to consider it. A shiver ran down his spine. The idea that he could have unknowingly raised children who weren't biologically his was horrifying. The implications were immense, not just for him and Meghan, but for the public image of the royal family, for every carefully curated appearance, for the trust of millions who had followed his life story for years. Harry felt trapped. Every step, every decision he'd made, every public statement now felt like it had been built on a lie. And the whisper reminded him of one undeniable truth: the world would never forgive ignorance, especially when it involved deception at this scale. He remembered the first time he met Archie, the tiny bundle in Meghan's arms. How he had swore to protect him with everything he had. How he had felt overwhelming love, overwhelming responsibility. And now, what if that love had been based on a lie? The whisper lingered in his mind as he walked to the makeup chair. Every movement felt surreal. He let the makeup artist apply foundation and powder, but he couldn't focus. His hands shook slightly, his eyes darting to the monitor showing the empty stage where he would soon stand. The producer approached him quietly, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "Harry, you okay?" He nodded mechanically. "Yeah, just ready." But he wasn't ready. He couldn't be. The whisper had done something irreversible. It had cracked the carefully constructed armor he wore for years. And as the minutes ticked closer to airtime, Harry felt a growing storm inside him. The stage manager called, 5 minutes to live broadcast. Harry's heart raced. He knew the world would see him in just a few moments. Millions of people, cameras pointed at him, lights glaring down. And he carried the weight of those whispered words, the terrifying possibility that the children he adored might not be his. He wanted to tell someone, anyone. But who? Meghan? No. She had her own role to play. The staff? They'd panic. And the whisperer? They were already gone, vanished like a shadow, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The whisper had sown doubt, yes, but it had also lit a spark of courage. Harry realized he couldn't go on pretending. He couldn't stand on that stage and lie. Not anymore. What would the audience think? What would the world think? What about his father? The Queen? The entire monarchy? The questions gnawed at him, each one sharper than the last. But deep down, a part of him knew he had no choice. The truth had to come out. And then came the envelope. Cream-colored, unmarked. He held it in his hands, feeling the weight of what was inside. The whisper's words echoed in his mind. You need to know. Before it's too late. Too late for what? Too late for him to remain a prince? Too late to protect the children? Too late to protect himself? He opened it slowly, carefully, as if the paper could somehow shatter the reality around him. Inside was a document. Confidential. Lab results. Names, dates, genetic markers. Evidence he wasn't supposed to see. And suddenly, everything the whisper had suggested seemed terrifyingly possible. Harry's hands shook. He had rehearsed the answers 1,000 times, but now every scripted word seemed meaningless. The story he had prepared for the world was suddenly irrelevant, because the truth, cold, unflinching, undeniable, was staring him in the face. He couldn't hide it anymore. The stage lights blinked red. 1 minute. The whisper's words surged again in his mind. They lied to you about them. He swallowed hard. He stepped toward the stage. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum. Every step brought him closer to the moment that would change everything. And as he took his place under the blinding lights, ready to face millions of viewers worldwide, Harry knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same, because the whisper had done its work. And what came next, the breakdown, the confession, the world-shattering revelation, was only the beginning. But what the audience didn't know was that backstage, someone else was watching. Someone who had been monitoring Harry for weeks, predicting every reaction, every hesitation. Someone who knew that the whisper alone wasn't enough, that the document in his hands would ignite the storm that no one could stop. And when that storm hit, no one would be safe from the fallout. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered how much a piece of paper can change everything? A single signature, a stamp, a date. It can define a life or unravel it completely. In the case of Archie and Lilibet, the documents that were supposed to confirm their existence became the first cracks in an elaborate royal facade. It all started with the whispers of hospital staff. Anonymous tips trickled into journalists' inboxes months before Harry's live confession. Something isn't right, one source claimed. There are records missing, signatures that don't match, and some files simply vanished. For most people, missing hospital paperwork would be mundane. A clerical error, a harmless mix-up, but not for the royal family. Every birth certificate, every medical note, every signature is scrutinized under a microscope. It's not just protocol, it's legacy, it's law, it's lineage. And the documents for Archie and Lilibet? They didn't add up. In Harry's hand, the envelope he received minutes before going live contained one of these very documents. A birth certificate flagged by a private investigator hired months earlier. It wasn't just any investigator. It was someone who had worked with MI6, someone skilled at navigating the labyrinth of secrecy the royal family so carefully constructs. The certificate had a few anomalies, subtle but unmistakable. The hospital name slightly altered, the attending physician's signature mismatched in style, the dates of birth seemingly transposed when compared with other records. A person trained to notice these things could see it immediately. For Harry, staring at it in that quiet backstage corridor, the implications hit him like a tidal wave. What did it mean if the certificates were falsified? If the documents he had trusted as proof of life and parentage weren't authentic? He felt his stomach knot. This wasn't a minor deception, it was systemic. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to construct a reality he wasn't aware of. And yet, publicly, the narrative had been different. The media, carefully fed with images and stories, had presented Archie and Lilibet as the children of Harry and Meghan, born naturally, celebrated by the public. Every announcement, every photograph, every baby appearance reinforced that narrative. But behind the cameras, the paper trail told another story. The first red flag came when a hospital staffer noticed discrepancies in Lilibet's California birth registration. According to The Insider, the attending nurse was puzzled by missing signatures on the standard forms. They attempted to verify with the hospital administrator, only to be told, "You're not authorized to see those files." For most, that would be the end of the trail. But some records were always meant to be discovered. Leaks, whether intentional or accidental, have a way of surfacing at the exact moment they're needed. When Harry read the certificate in the envelope, he didn't need anyone to explain it. He recognized it immediately as falsified. The layout, the font, the placement of names, it was almost correct, but not perfect. Close enough to pass casual scrutiny, yet transparent to anyone paying attention. Why would someone do this? Was it about protecting him? Or was it about controlling the narrative for Meghan's benefit? Was it a safety precaution or a calculated deception to hide something larger? The contradictions mounted quickly. While the certificates suggested normal births, other evidence pointed elsewhere. Ultrasound records were mysteriously incomplete. Some images were missing, while others appeared digitally altered. Even hospital visitor logs showed gaps where staff claimed to have seen Meghan in labor. Harry's mind raced. Every public appearance, every media story, suddenly became suspect. How much of the happy family image had been a performance? How much had he been manipulated into accepting as truth? He glanced again at the certificate. The names were correct. The dates were plausible. But the markers of authenticity, the signatures, the official stamps, didn't align with any known protocol. One tiny element, almost imperceptible, confirmed the impossible. Someone had deliberately created a falsified record. Harry's pulse quickened. If the certificates weren't real, then what about everything else? The baptisms, the hospital photos, the announcements, the appearances. Were they all part of a fabricated story? The thought was overwhelming. The pieces didn't just fail to fit, they painted a picture of a larger conspiracy. And Harry, for years, had unknowingly played along, believing in a truth that might never have existed. Backstage, the whisper of the young producer echoed again in his mind. They lied to you about them. It made sense now. The whisper wasn't about miscommunication or PR spin. It was about fundamental truth. The children he had raised, the children he had loved, were enveloped in a web of deceit. And yet, the documents alone weren't proof enough. Harry needed more. He needed confirmation. He needed a trail he could follow, an evidence chain to substantiate what the certificate hinted at. This is where the private investigator came in. Months before, the investigator had quietly started gathering corroborating evidence. Hospital memos, employee testimonies, even flight logs. It wasn't just about paper. It was about patterns, inconsistencies that told a story the certificates couldn't speak aloud. Patterns emerged: trips by surrogates to various facilities, financial transactions for undisclosed services, unusual security protocols surrounding the children's early lives. Nothing overtly illegal, but enough to suggest someone had carefully engineered a scenario, controlling what Harry and the public saw. By the time he sat under the studio lights, holding that envelope, the truth hit him in full force. It wasn't just about identity. It was about control, manipulation, and betrayal. Harry's hands shook as he folded the certificate carefully. He had always believed that truth would protect him, that honesty would safeguard the children, safeguard the family, safeguard the legacy. But the document in his hands revealed a truth far more dangerous. Honesty had been denied to him. And the worst part? No one had told him. Not Meghan, not his aides, not the hospital staff who might have known. Someone had deliberately withheld the most important information a father could ever need. The certificate was more than paper. It was a message, a challenge, a trigger for the confession that would come live on air. And as Harry finally approached the stage, his mind was in turmoil. The envelope tucked safely in his pocket, he knew the world would see him cry, would see him falter, would see him confess. But even that confession would only hint at the truth. It couldn't contain it all. The audience never realized that behind every tear was a story waiting to be told, a trail of documents and whispers that stretched far beyond what they could imagine. Because the certificate wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first key to understanding a labyrinth of deception, carefully constructed to manipulate perception, hide parentage, and control narrative. And when the camera focused on Harry, when the lights illuminated his face, and the host asked about Archie and Lilibet, the envelope burned a hole in his pocket. The truth pressed against him, demanding release. It was at that moment, just before the cameras went live, that Harry understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The certificate had forced him to make a choice: remain silent and complicit, or speak and unravel the story the world thought it knew. And he chose the latter. But what came next would expose not just falsified documents, but a reality so shocking it would leave millions questioning everything they believed about Archie, Lilibet, and the royal family itself. Because behind that envelope, behind the whispers, behind the falsified birth certificates, lay a secret even Harry was only beginning to comprehend. And it was about to be revealed, live on television. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Could it really be true? Could the children the world had celebrated as the next generation of modern royalty not be biologically Harry's? Could Archie and Lilibet, the little faces the cameras loved to capture, the children whose every milestone was broadcast to millions, be borrowed? The whisper backstage, the envelope in his hands, and now the documents pointing to inconsistencies all painted a picture Harry had struggled to deny. But the envelope didn't just contain certificates. It contained hints at something much larger, something that would make surrogacy rumors, previously dismissed as tabloid nonsense, suddenly plausible. For years, the narrative had been simple. Meghan Markle, glamorous and determined, gave birth to her children, and Harry, proud and loving, embraced fatherhood. But reality, as Harry began to see it, was far more complicated. Private investigations revealed curious patterns surrounding both pregnancies. During Meghan's first pregnancy, staff noticed an unusual level of secrecy. Ultrasound appointments were tightly controlled. Photographs were never taken inside certain rooms. Nurses reported that some records were missing for security reasons, though no explanation was provided. For a normal pregnancy, the gaps were unusual. For the royal family, they were alarming. And then came the second pregnancy. Even more restrictions. Hospital access limited. Certain doctors reportedly reassigned at the last minute. No one outside a tight inner circle could confirm timelines or appearances. Even Harry himself was given sparse information. At first, he told himself it was for security. The royal family, after all, had faced constant threats. But as he read the envelope and pieced together the details, a darker possibility formed. What if the children were never meant to be his biologically? The investigators' notes suggested a covert surrogacy arrangement, one that had been hidden from Harry. According to sources, surrogates were carefully selected, flown in for brief periods, and isolated from public and press scrutiny. Births reportedly occurred in controlled environments, under surveillance, with non-disclosure agreements signed to protect identities. Every detail was designed to keep the children's true origin a secret. Every photograph released, every appearance, was staged to reinforce a narrative of natural birth and family unity. Could it be that for years, Harry had been unknowingly raising children who had been engineered for public consumption, not biological inheritance? The thought was suffocating. He remembered holding Archie for the first time, the tiny hands gripping his fingers. He remembered kissing Lillibet's soft cheek in the garden, thinking of the love and protection he would always provide. And now, with every touch, every memory, the weight of possibility pressed harder. Was it love based on deception? Harry had tried to rationalize it. Perhaps there had been a surrogacy plan, but with his knowledge and consent. Perhaps the children had been born elsewhere, but were always meant to be his family. But the documents in the envelope suggested otherwise. They indicated secrecy, isolation, manipulation, and crucially, a lack of transparency. And then there were the photographs. Analysts had spent months examining official images. Certain angles and positions of the children in public appearances appeared too precise, almost mechanical, as if choreographed to hide something. Odd lighting, odd angles, a recurring absence of unplanned interactions with staff. Small, but suspicious patterns. Was it possible that surrogates were used, and the public only ever saw the children for short, controlled appearances? That every smile, every waving hand, every birthday picture was carefully orchestrated to sustain a narrative? The investigators didn't just stop at observation. Financial records showed transfers that could be linked to private medical services abroad. Names were redacted, but timing and amounts suggested planned surrogacy arrangements. Harry's thoughts spiraled. He loved his children. He had defended them publicly countless times. He had championed their right to privacy, their right to normalcy. And yet, if these suspicions were true, his love had been directed at children whose origins were concealed from him. And Meghan, what role did she play? Was she a mother protecting her children, a partner shielding her husband, or a manipulator orchestrating a global narrative? Some staff whispered that Meghan had been controlling every detail, that her team coordinated arrivals, departures, even minor interactions. Every public appearance seemed rehearsed. Harry had noticed patterns but attributed them to safety, to celebrity, to the burdens of modern royal life. Now he questioned everything. The live broadcast minutes away seemed almost trivial compared to the storm raging inside him. He could feel the envelope pressing in his pocket, the weight of secrets, the truth he had been denied. Was it ethical? Could he bring this to light publicly? Could he even bear to say the words? Yet, as he stood under the studio lights, it was clear he could not ignore it. The truth had built up over years, layer by layer, whisper by whisper, document by document. And now, the stage was set for revelation. He looked at the monitor showing Archie and Lilibet in family appearances, smiling innocently in past footage. Every expression, every laugh, every gesture, if the surrogacy allegations were true, was a construct, a performance, carefully curated, crafted. The thought made Harry's chest tighten. How could anyone reconcile love with deception? How could he? And yet, he couldn't turn back. The world would see him. Millions of eyes were poised to witness him speak. And he would not speak lies. The surrogacy allegations were more than speculation. They were pieces of a puzzle that demanded confrontation. And as Harry stepped toward the camera, ready to face the host, ready to face the audience, the storm inside him reached its peak. Could he find the words to explain the impossible? Could he speak the truth about children he had loved, nurtured, and protected, who may not have been biologically his? Could he do it without destroying everything else he valued? These questions swirled in the air, unanswerable, as the studio lights glared down and the red record light flickered on. Harry took a deep breath. The whisper, the envelope, the documents, the photographs, they all converged in a single moment of decision. And then, the cameras captured it. The breakdown that would be replayed across the world. The confession that would shatter perceptions. The moment when surrogacy allegations, whispered rumors, and hidden truths collided in one prince's tears. Because the world was about to see something no one could have prepared for. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Could a streaming deal, worth millions, really intersect with one of the most personal and intimate aspects of a man's life? Could the gleaming world of Hollywood and the cold corridors of royalty collide in a way that left a prince exposed, vulnerable, and crying on live television? In Harry's case, the answer was yes. The Netflix deal had always been more than just a business arrangement. For Harry and Meghan, it was a statement, a declaration of independence, a platform to tell their story on their own terms. A $100 million contract, 5 years of content, promised a narrative curated entirely by them. Documentaries, specials, podcasts, it was their kingdom, digital and global. But money, power, and control have a way of complicating truth. Harry had believed the Netflix deal could serve as a shield, a way to reclaim narrative control after years of intrusion, scrutiny, and rumor. Yet, behind the scenes, executives had noticed inconsistencies. Production reports hinted at staged, family moments, children appearing under suspiciously controlled conditions, and unexplainable gaps in filming schedules. Not enough to cancel a deal outright, but enough to raise eyebrows. The revelations surrounding Archie and Lilibet were far from coincidental. According to a studio insider, some executives had already begun questioning what they were being shown. They seemed too perfect, one insider said. The kids never looked like they were just living a normal life. Every laugh, every reaction, it felt choreographed. Harry had been aware of some of these concerns. He had been told to frame events in a positive light for the cameras, to ensure every shot supported the family brand. At first, it seemed harmless. A father protecting his children, a prince trying to shield them from scrutiny. But as the surrogacy rumors began to resurface, he realized the truth was far more insidious. And Netflix wasn't just a passive observer. Executives had received whispers, too. Anomalies in hospital records, private investigators' notes, and cryptic emails hinting at arrangements Harry hadn't been told about. They couldn't ignore it. And Harry, holding the envelope backstage, knew it. The day before the live interview, Harry had been called to a meeting in Santa Monica. A senior producer and a legal advisor sat across from him, laptops open, confidential documents spread out like a battlefield map. They asked questions that seemed casual but carried weight. Are the children biologically yours? Were any appearances staged? Do you consent to releasing this footage? Harry's stomach turned. He realized the deal that had promised freedom now bound him in chains. To protect the Netflix brand, to protect Meghan, he had to maintain the narrative. To tell the truth could jeopardize everything, not just financially, but emotionally, legally, and publicly. And yet, the truth gnawed at him. He remembered the evening after that meeting, alone in his Montecito home, flipping through family albums and archived footage. The way Archie's hand fit into his. The way Lillibet laughed in a garden. Every moment replayed with new eyes, new suspicion, new fear. Was this real or orchestrated? How much had he truly been a father? And how much had he been part of a performance? The envelope burned a hole in his pocket. He couldn't ignore it. Not now. Meanwhile, Netflix executives had begun to take subtle steps. Some had called internal meetings, reviewing production timelines, scrutinizing contracts, questioning legal clauses about child appearances. They wanted guarantees, not just for compliance with labor laws, but for ethical representation. If anything emerged to suggest deception, particularly around the children, the fallout could be catastrophic. And for Harry, the live interview had become inevitable. The envelope was a ticking time bomb. The whispers backstage, the certificates, the surrogacy allegations, and now the Netflix investigations all converged at a single point. Him, under the spotlight, millions watching, with the truth impossible to contain. He had to speak. Walking onto that stage, the weight of the Netflix deal pressed on him like a lead vest. Each step toward the host, toward the cameras, was measured but trembling, calculated but unsure. He knew what he was about to say could impact the deal, the public perception, and his own sense of fatherhood. But the alternative, silence, was no longer an option. The cameras rolled. The lights blazed. And the host began with the soft, familiar questions about family life, charity initiatives, and professional endeavors. Harry answered calmly at first, his tone steady, carefully crafted. But inside, his mind raced. The envelope in his pocket, the whisper, the certificate, it all demanded release. And then came the question about the children. The words Archie and Lilibet echoed in the studio, bouncing off walls and lights, piercing through his rehearsed calm. He felt a physical jolt. He glanced down at the envelope, feeling the paper between his fingers, a tangible reminder of secrets he hadn't known. It was at that moment that the carefully curated, 5-year, $100 million Netflix narrative, his claim to independence and control, collided with the raw, undeniable truth. The live audience watched as Harry's voice cracked. His shoulders slumped. The confident prince poised for media mastery faltered under the weight of real life. "They're not mine," he whispered. And just like that, the streaming empire, the contracts, the carefully planned PR strategy, everything hinged on him, began to unravel. The implications were immediate. Network insiders later revealed that executives had called emergency meetings minutes after the broadcast. Legal teams scrambled. Public relations plans were rewritten. Contingency plans for content already produced were reconsidered. How could a man who controlled his own platform have been blindsided so completely? Harry had been careful, meticulous even, but the envelope, the documents inside, the corroborating evidence, exposed what even the most powerful digital empire couldn't contain: truth. And truth, as the prince realized under the studio lights, was far more dangerous than any media deal. Because the Netflix cameras might not have captured everything that was about to happen next. Backstage whispers, frantic calls, legal maneuvers, but Harry did. He felt it in every tremor, every pause, every tear that threatened to fall. The deal had promised freedom, but it had inadvertently become a conduit for exposure, a lens through which the world would see his private life in devastating detail. And as the live broadcast continued, every word Harry uttered carried weight, not just for the audience watching at home, but for executives reviewing the footage in confidential offices, for Meghan and her team navigating panic backstage, and for Harry himself, whose world was unraveling piece by piece. The perfect narrative, carefully scripted, financed, and controlled, was collapsing, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Who really controls the narrative behind a royal family? Is it the monarchy, the public, or the people we least suspect, working silently behind the scenes? In Meghan Markle's case, insiders suggest it might have been her. Long before Harry's emotional breakdown on live television, Meghan reportedly established a network of aides, consultants, and outside operatives whose sole purpose was to manage, control, and, some allege, manipulate every aspect of their lives. Public appearances, interviews, social media, and even private family moments were meticulously orchestrated. Every detail mattered. Every leak was anticipated. Every photo calculated. According to sources, this network was multi-layered. On the surface, there were the trusted PR team and legal advisors, visible and responsible for media interactions. Behind them, however, were consultants who allegedly handled special projects, discreetly arranging appearances, coordinating security, and managing private matters that could become public scandals if mishandled. But it wasn't just image control. The network allegedly extended into family logistics: how and when the children appeared in public, which events they attended, and even who could witness their earliest days. Some insiders have claimed that the network had influence over hospital arrangements, scheduling of doctor visits, and even details surrounding surrogacy or surrogate alternatives. Imagine the level of control required to maintain the appearance of normalcy while potentially hiding the most personal truth a father could know: the origins of his own children. It's difficult to overstate how comprehensive this operation allegedly was. Every move was tracked, every statement vetted, every appearance choreographed. One former insider described the process as like running a mini-government, but your citizens are your family. They were responsible for anticipating every question, preemptively countering every rumor, and ensuring the story projected to the public aligned perfectly with the carefully constructed image. And here's where it becomes even more complex. Sources suggest that this network didn't just manage appearances, it enforced secrecy. Staff who questioned protocols or noticed inconsistencies were reportedly moved, reassigned, or discouraged from speaking. Communications were tightly controlled. Certain information, including medical or legal documents, could only be accessed by select trusted personnel. Harry, for his part, may have been shielded from certain aspects of the children's early lives. According to some sources, he was deliberately kept in the dark on matters the network deemed sensitive. It was framed as protection or security, but in hindsight, Harry realized it might have been deliberate obfuscation, designed to control what he knew and when. This alleged network also reportedly had external connections. Lawyers, private investigators, and even entertainment executives were quietly involved in managing appearances, verifying information, and maintaining the family's image in Hollywood circles. A Netflix production insider reportedly described how consultants would review children's appearances, noting timing, camera angles, and lighting. They would instruct staff on exactly how to present moments that appeared spontaneous but were anything but. Harry, reading the envelope backstage, understood suddenly why so many things didn't add up: the missing documents, the strange hospital protocols, the perfectly staged photographs. The network, he realized, was more than just PR. It was a mechanism of control. And as he prepared to face the cameras, he knew that confronting the truth, even in the brief seconds he would have on air, was a rebellion against the system that had carefully constructed their world. Because networks like this aren't just organizational, they're psychological. They create a narrative bubble in which those inside are insulated from reality. When cracks appear, it can feel like the walls of the world itself are collapsing. That's exactly what Harry felt in the moments before he spoke. He glanced at Meghan backstage. She was calm on the surface, but staff later revealed that she had been issuing rapid-fire instructions through an earpiece, coordinating the flow of information, managing camera angles, and attempting to minimize potential damage. The network was in full effect, but Harry was no longer a passive participant. The moment he opened the envelope, the carefully constructed bubble began to tear. He had the information. He had the proof. He had the truth. And the network, no matter how sophisticated, could not contain it. Even the audience watching live sensed the tension. Harry's voice, initially measured, began to quaver. Every word was loaded, every pause calculated by instinct rather than script. The network could plan appearances, craft speeches, and manage optics, but it could not script tears, nor could it contain the emotional weight of betrayal and discovery. One insider who spoke to staff after the broadcast revealed that Meghan's operatives were in shock. They hadn't anticipated that Harry would speak like that, the source said. He wasn't just breaking protocol. He was dismantling the system they had built to manage perception. What is astonishing is the audacity of the network itself. If these claims are true, it wasn't just about protecting privacy or safeguarding the family. It was about controlling reality, controlling narrative, and, some argue, controlling the father's perception of the children. And this is where the story takes an even darker turn. Because controlling appearances is one thing, but controlling truth is another. And for Harry, it became impossible to ignore. He had loved his children, he had protected them, and yet he was forced to confront the horrifying possibility that much of what he had believed, nurtured, and defended could have been orchestrated by a system designed to keep him compliant and silent. And the network, as sophisticated as it may have been, had overlooked one critical element, the human element. Harry's love, his intuition, his commitment to truth. That element could not be scripted. It could not be controlled. And it could not be contained. In the moments before the cameras started rolling, Harry's mind was a battlefield. The network had tried to shield him from reality, but the envelope and the whisper had cut through the facade. He knew that once he spoke, once he let the truth emerge, even partially, the network would be powerless to manage the fallout. Because networks rely on secrecy, they rely on compliance. They rely on those within the system believing the story they're told. And Harry had just been handed the key to a story no one wanted revealed. As he stepped toward the stage, he felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. Fear of the consequences, yes, but also the exhilaration of finally knowing, of finally holding the truth in his hands, and finally being free to speak it. And as he stood under the glaring studio lights, the network's carefully constructed illusion began to crumble, moment by moment. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a secret too big to remain hidden finally reaches the palace walls? How does an institution, centuries old, trained to control perception and protect legacy, respond when its carefully guarded narratives begin to unravel in real time? For Prince Harry and Meghan, that moment had arrived. Minutes after Harry's tearful confession on live television, a flurry of activity erupted inside Buckingham Palace. Phones rang incessantly. Private lines connected aides, advisors, and security personnel. The normally controlled and silent corridors were alive with murmurs and hurried footsteps. Staffers who had spent decades perfecting discretion found themselves scrambling to make sense of the impossible. The first call went to King Charles himself. Reports suggest he was on the line within moments, his voice calm but firm, masking the shock he felt. The Queen Consort, Camilla, was also briefed immediately, her face reportedly ashen with disbelief. By the time senior palace officials convened in the private council chambers, the reality was unavoidable. The confession had thrown centuries of protocol into chaos. Harry's words, so simple yet so devastating, had pierced the armor of the royal family. "They're not mine, and they were borrowed," weren't just personal revelations. They were challenges to an entire system of control, a seismic shift that demanded a response. One insider claimed that the palace quickly began an internal audit. Staffers were ordered to pull all records related to Archie and Lilibet. Every file, every document, every correspondence between staff, medical personnel, and Meghan's team was reviewed with painstaking scrutiny. This wasn't just damage control. It was a race against time to understand the scale of the truth Harry had just revealed. King Charles reportedly summoned a private meeting with Harry's closest advisors and security personnel. According to sources, the room was tense, the air thick with anxiety. Some aides whispered that the king's first reaction was not anger, but calculation. He understood that this revelation, if confirmed, could shake public trust, disrupt media narratives, and even destabilize the perception of the monarchy itself. Camilla, meanwhile, was reportedly grappling with a mix of disbelief and pragmatism. Sources suggest she immediately demanded clarity. "We need to know everything. Now. All of it." The palace network, trained for centuries to protect and shield, was suddenly forced into action not to hide a scandal, but to comprehend it before it spiraled completely out of control. One palace insider later recounted the extraordinary measures taken in the hours following Harry's confession. Legal teams were mobilized to evaluate potential implications for inheritance, public appearances, and official duties. Security protocols were tightened around both the prince and the duchess. And, remarkably, staffers were reportedly instructed not to speak to the media under any circumstances, a directive almost impossible to enforce in the era of instant social media leaks. Meanwhile, the conversation within the walls of Buckingham Palace wasn't merely logistical. It was deeply personal. The king reportedly expressed concern not only for the public fallout, but for the emotional state of his son. Harry's distress, his tears, his unflinching admission. These were not things any monarch could simply ignore. His position demanded action, but his heart reminded him that the confession came from a man he loved, a son grappling with betrayal and confusion. One shocking detail later emerged from a palace insider. Aides suggested that senior members of the royal household were divided. Some advocated for immediate public clarification to preempt rumors and protect the monarchy's image. Others urged caution, recommending a private resolution with Harry before anything reached the press. The debate was intense, with loyalties and anxieties colliding. As Harry left the studio, the palace was already anticipating the next step. Security teams were dispatched to Montecito to ensure no unwanted contact reached him. Legal teams prepared statements that could be released in a matter of minutes if the situation escalated. And